Setlist.io. Music licensing reimagined.
Welcome back to the Tim and Steve Show. I am Tim Beard.
I'm Steve Morris.
We have a special guest today.
Terese Bastarache.
From the Resolve and We the People of New Hampshire. Regular citizen like the rest of us. Let's see, I met you 2 years ago now, I think, when my daughter's getting kicked out of school every day for not wearing a mask. And we did you had a assembly going on outside of the Capitol, waving flags and lots, like there had to be 75 at least, 100 people, something like that.
I think it was pretty cold winter.
It was cold.
We were trying to keep everyone up and running.
It was, and she spoke in front of you guys, and she did
awesome.
Very well. She was only like 12 at the time, so so I just wanted to get you on the show because I know there's lots of things that are happening all the time in the state, and we are always trying to get awareness for our town, our state, and our country, because none of us are happy with the direction in which things are going. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you, how you got involved, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Thank you for having me on the show. So, I was raised on Rush Limbaugh with my dad. My mom was more of a Democrat. And I remember asking my dad, what about being a libertarian? He's like, oh, your vote won't ever count. And from that point on, I registered as a Republican. I was a straight vote. And I was born and raised in Southern California. My parents adopted my 4 younger siblings out of guardianship. My mom was always helping the homeless and just really involved in the community. And my dad was a very successful businessman. So I kind of had both of those things going on. My mom was a nurse. And I remember telling my mom I wanted to be Bonnie, who was my brother's social worker. And she says, oh, no, you don't, be a nurse. So I did end up in finance, actually, right out of college by default. And I had a successful career there. But then 9/11 happened. And I did grow up in a Christian home. And I had walked away from my faith, typical 20-year-old party scene, all that. But I found myself in a hot mess with my marriage and, they were moving the site to Texas, and I'm like, what am I really doing with my life? And I remember going back to church after 9/11 and saying, here I am, Lord, use me. And it wasn't shortly after that my whole world turned upside down, and I found myself going back to school. And I'm like, became a nurse at that point because I could put 2 years into it and know that I could provide for my daughter and not be outsourced to India and all this stuff. So, I didn't know where the Lord was taking me, but one thing led to another, and I always wanted to be a foster mom, and I always wanted to get to a place where I could help children that were in that situation. And so I ended up running actually a ministry for kids that were in foster care and realizing not everyone can foster and adopt, but everyone could do something was the idea. So getting the awareness out to the community that there's a kid over here that needs football gear, or there's a kid over here that wants to go to camp. Can we help? With those things. And that was under a national organization, and it became one of the biggest chapters in the States. So I was known in the community as a nurse. I was known in the community as someone who was helping kids in foster care. And I really didn't think about my elections until the morning of November 8th. I would just go in and vote down ballot. And then came the pandemic. And I was actually in a place where my employer wasn't doing the mandates, but a lot of my friends' employers were. So I had worked 3 years at Dartmouth-Hitchcock. I had worked 3 years at Concord Hospital. It's a small community, and I knew a lot of them were really terrified. They're about to lose their jobs. And I remember one pivotal point for me was someone who'd been at Concord Hospital 28 years. She was the insurance holder for her family. Her husband owned a logging company, and he had actually just been diagnosed with ocular cancer. So he was going through treatment for cancer in his eye. Her daughter was in the same age as my son that I adopted, and she was having to pay $1,200 a month for childcare because the school shut down because she had to get to work, and her exemption was denied. And she just fell apart in my arms. She's like, we haven't been able to pay our mortgage. We're going to lose our health insurance. He's going to die. And I can't get my child educated. Like, what is happening? Her pension, like everything. And I was at that time working nights as a hospice nurse. So I was available during the day. And I'm like, for everyone who can't stand, I'm going to go stand. And I remember looking at Kevin and saying, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to do. And that has kind of been one of my phrases this entire journey for me. And went to the dollar store and got a poster board and honk if you're against mandates. And I decided I'm just going to go stand outside of Concord Hospital for this friend of mine, and all the others that were, freaking out. And that just led, I remember that first day, it was 98 degrees out. And the first hour I stood there, I was like, Lord, why am I here? Why am I doing this? And I put on music to kind of, block out the insecurity and the nervousness of standing there. But I remember somebody went around the corner at the intersection with the window down and yelled out by name, Terese, you're a nurse. You should be ashamed of yourself. Because I was known in my red hair, and I was just like, how am I going to be demonized for this? Will I ever be able to work in this town again? Because at that point in time, it was really sacrilegious not to be all in with, even my own pastor had put on social media, if you care about the community and people, you're going to go get vaccinated. And I was like, wow, this is brand new. A lot of people are nervous about it. And it got very hostile very quick. So I had just lost my church family. There was a lot going on. And I remember all of a sudden somebody walked across the crosswalk to come stand with me. Or first, somebody honked their horn. I was like, thank you, Jesus, for someone honking the horn. And then somebody actually walked across the crosswalk to stand with me. And by the end of the day, there was 15 people standing with me. But the most beautiful thing was that this woman came down and she parked behind where we were standing on the corner and climbed up this little embankment, and she waved me over. And she said, you see up there on the 3rd floor of Concord Hospital, that's where the administrators meet on Wednesdays. And we were up there meeting, and they're about to roll out the mandate date. And they heard the cars honking, and they saw you down here, and they know that staffing is going to be an issue. I want you to know you need to keep showing up. And I just cried. I was just like, okay, so I was like, okay, what can I do? I can come every day at lunchtime for 3 days a week and just be consistent. And that small group turned into a larger group to where we outgrew the corner. And one thing led to another. So that's kind of where my journey began. And then there was a call to action by Rebuild New Hampshire to go down to St. A's, that there was federal money that was going to be voted on that had a stipulation in it that if they accepted that $29 million, they would be obligated to isolate and quarantine anyone the federal government, which at the time was Biden and Harris, deemed a health hazard. And it was at the same time we saw people in Australia having to go into camps. And I was like, this is not okay. This is not okay. And we don't need the money with this kind of language in it. This is like Holocaust language. And so we went down to St. A's, and they had a breakfast meeting, and then they were reconfiguring the room, and then they were going to do the executive council meeting where they were going to vote on this money. And it was in between that time that I showed up. And I got there, and they were only letting 50 people in, which in New Hampshire, our Constitution says the public should be able to witness these votes. So people were already upset about that they were being kept outside. But they said, Terese, when you show up, we'll have someone come out so you can come in. And when I went in, there was a gentleman named Frank who has grown up in state custody. He was at the YDC Center, Sununu Center. He saw a lot of the abuse. So he's had a lot of trauma. He knows what it's like to have your freedom taken away. I walked in, and he was pacing. He was triggered. He was upset, and he was saying, you're going to just put us all in FEMA camps. You're going to put us in FEMA camps. And being a foster mom, understanding Frank, everyone's like, Terese, you can calm him down. So I went up and I said, Frank, let me talk to people from a nursing perspective and how, this is worrisome. And I was able to talk to the crowd. They were asking me questions. And then Frank and Kelly, everyone clapped after I kind of was trying to motivate the crowd that was there, which was mostly lobbyists. I remember as I was standing in line to go into the room, the person in front of me introduced herself as a lobbyist from Dartmouth Hitchcock. And I thought, oh, dear Lord, I'm going into a room where it's everyone wants their hands on the money. And I was tired. I'd been up all night. But anyways, I said what I said. It was about women who are pregnant, losing their jobs, nursing friends, all of this thing. And there was an applause, and then the chant started, shut it down, shut it down. And they didn't hold the vote that day because of that. And then it was rescheduled for in October. So, of course, we rallied as many people as we could. We shut up for October. They decided to have it at the police training center in Concord, New Hampshire, which was suspicious to a lot of people. We all decided we're going to go and we're going to be dead silent. We're just going to be super quiet. They already know where we stand on this, that we don't want the money. We want to see the vote happen, and we want to hold the executive council accountable for how they land on this vote. And we went in. If you haven't seen the video, I was sitting perfectly still, quiet. I had brought my boys out to go to the planetarium, praise God. But all of a sudden I got tapped on the shoulder, and I looked up, and there was 4 state troopers, and they asked me to come to the back of the room. And I didn't realize the back of the room was actually a curtain, like it had partitioned. And again, that day they only let 170 people in. We had like 400 show up, so there's a lot of people that were kept outside again. And I remember going behind the curtain, and there's like this whole huge space with all these like vans. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, you had all this space for everyone outside to be here. Like, why wouldn't you expand the room out? And no idea what was going on. And they're like, you're being arrested for disorderly conduct. And they start to take the Bolduc pin off my sweater. And I'm like, but what did I do? And they're like, you're just being arrested for disorderly conduct. I'm like, but what did I do that was disorderly? No one could answer. And I said, my purse is out there. My boys are out there. I'm supposed to work in a couple hours. And as they're lifting me into the back of the paddy wagon, I was in like pure shock. Never been in trouble before. As they're lifting me into the back of the paddy wagon, I yelled out, we're being arrested, because I wanted someone to grab my phone, my purse, and my boys and get the keys to the car seats. I mean, I was just like, they're not going to know where I went. And then, of course, Frank had been summoned to come to the back room, too. So he yelled out. And then there was people in the crowd that were like, why are they being arrested? And then they started to, it was a total of 9 of us within like a 4-minute span that were all arrested, put into paddy wagons, brought to the county jail. Marilyn Todd, who had been very involved in voter integrity in Wyndham, was arrested with a little boy in her arms. And we've had 6 hearings. The DA has actually articulated that we were targeted. There was a list that we had been disruptive in other political proceedings, I think was the word he had used. And so, and then he listed off, and like several of them, none of us weren't there. We didn't attend like the DHHS meeting, or we weren't, so, and Monica, and the only evidence, they have cameras from the ceiling, and in that evidence, it shows that they said that we were warned, and Officer Megan Walsh, but it shows me leaving the room to take my boys to the bathroom and to the planetarium, and then coming back well after she did the warning. So, like, technically I didn't even get the warning. Anyways, 2 weeks later, I get the criminal complaint, and it said that I yelled the word amen. They then switched it to, I stated the word amen, because you can't see her. No one turns their head to look at me or anything in the video. And then the latest version the DA has is that I uttered the word amen, allegedly. And the only evidence they have is a state trooper saying that he heard the word amen come from my direction, and he recognized my voice from Facebook. But we've had 6 hearings. Now we all have our trial dates. Mine's a 2-day trial, June 28th, 29th. So you've got 9 trials. Well, one of the cases they did go ahead and drop for Monica. So 8 trials, all on the taxpayer.
And what's the penalty? Like, what's the worst they could do to you?
I think it's like a $1,000 fine.
So they've spent hundreds of thousands, probably, of our taxpayer money to give you a $1,000 fine at the worst for saying amen.
So not
Allegedly.
even that.
Right.
Like, if you haven't watched the video,
We'll put the video up.
yeah, maybe at the end of this. Maybe we can
we'll put it up at the end so that
import
everyone
it
can see it.
so that you can see. But as Americans, there is something totally wrong with what's going on, because if they had something on you from before, then they should have like subpoenaed you or summoned you to the police station, and not that they did it for effect so that people won't go and participate.
Fear.
That was total to create a fear, which is straight up, in my point of view, from my study of history of politics, a communist, tyrannical, however you want to look at it, but it's not what America is based on. Like, America is based on free speech, participation, and that was to scare, just like with the January 6th defendants, how some of them still sit locked up with no charges brought against them. It's to keep us from going and executing our freedom, our rights to protest, to let the government know we're not happy with whatever they're doing, because it's our government, not theirs. So that's my take on it as a former military, retired military officer. That's just, it's appalling to me that I 25 years defended the Constitution, and then in a 6-minute long clip, you can see the Constitution getting thrown out. From my point of view, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, it's only like a 7-minute video, but it shows you like 5 minutes leading up into, and then you can get the whole video and the whole film, and none of it's been edited. Fortunately, there was actually someone sitting right behind me, one chair over, that was Facebook Live the entire time, right on me, and so we have there was 140 cameras in the room. The thing that's crazy is that Governor Sununu, when you watch this, he's like this texting and he's nodding and he's directing the whole thing.
Looks like it. That's what I thought from watching it. I was like, because you can time it with the actions, because whoever was filming it, the video that you have up on the Resolve website,
they zoomed in on him
several times, and you can see the troopers reacting within seconds. To me, that's what it appears. And we hadn't even talked about that.
Yeah.
But I had the same
You got to watch
impression.
it. You got to watch it. And the thing that's really alarming is that they came out and they said they were doing an investigation from the meeting before at St. A's, and they came out and did a big media press release that they were dropping the investigation, that there wasn't anything that would hold water, because it was in between the two meetings. And but everyone assumed that meant they were dropping the investigation for what happened to me on October 13th with uttering the word amen. And so as I'm out there in the general public, like, your case was dropped, congratulations. I'm like, no, it wasn't. We're still paying for attorney fees. We're still going through the process. I have, not only as a foster mom who adopted my boys and as a registered nurse where people can easily file complaints, I have really had to embrace this live free or die. Like, if you don't want me to be a nurse anymore, Lord, that's okay. If you want whatever you have planned for me, here I am, use me, and I'm going to keep standing, and they're not going to chill me. In fact, this is just catapulting me further, and that's what it did. It catapulted me into the front line of a liberty movement, because I had to quickly realize that as a triage nurse, I have a serious problem right here, and I need to figure this out. Because this is either I'm jumping from a high-rise building like our friends in China from psychosis, or I'm getting in the game, and at all costs, and even if it's sacrificial, even if I'm tired, even if it's 10 hours a day, I have to understand who I'm voting for. I voted for Sununu. I thought straight vote Republican meant that I was, 2A protected and no taxes, and that's why I moved to New Hampshire, And then I realized it was all in jeopardy. And so living 5 miles from the Capitol, my ability to go down there, and then God has just blessed me with an army of people who do have integrity, that have been deeply rooted in New Hampshire politics for 10, 15, 20 years, that very quickly came around to bring me up to speed. And I'm the type of person where I'm very conceptual. Like, I'm not good at memorizing things, but I'm a why person. Why this? Why? What is that? What is an executive council? What do they do? What are their responsibilities? And I just saturated myself in it, but also realizing I knew nothing. I didn't even know what rhino meant 2 years ago. I didn't. And so being very honest and humble that I started from nowheres, and that is my next door neighbor. That is my sphere of influence, are people that are just like, what the hell hockey puck is going on? And how do we... Is it too late to save it? What can we do right here, right now, and start being doers in practical ways that have, a result? And I do believe we can take it back. And this is after 2 years. I would not put my hand, my energy into something that I didn't believe we actually have a chance. I'd go pick blueberries and raise piglets, I say, but I do believe New Hampshire is small enough and liberty-minded enough that we just have to get organized, and we need leadership, and we can have a government that is for the people, by the people, and we just need to press in and link arms and go after it. And it's really not complicated. I think people right now are feeling very discouraged, very weary, very hopeless, overwhelmed. And I think, if we can serve up tangible ways to make it very hard for them to do the wrong thing, it really doesn't take much to really upset these narcissists. And when you do it with other liberty-minded people, it's actually very energizing. It can become kind of addictive, to be honest. So, here I am, now known for my activism, which I never thought I'd have the title activist behind my name, but that's definitely how I'm described.
In America now, you're an ist no matter what.
Yeah.
Especially white heterosexual male, as we say all the time. We're the
bane of the country.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. Surprised we even are allowed on the YouTubes anymore.
Yeah, I don't meet the profile. I'm not proud of this, but I'm not afraid to tell my story. I have had an abortion. I am fully pro-life and feel like, as a hospice nurse, I pronounce on the final heartbeat, and I do believe the first heartbeat is when life begins, and we need to do better by our girls. There's a better way to provide birth control that's not emotionally harming, as an abortion should be the absolute last resort. And I think both sides should be able to come together on that idea. And but people get caught up in all the things to divide, whether it be abortion, LGBTQ, race, all of those things. And I'm like, guys, that's just a distraction. We are either China jumping out of a high-rise building, or we are on a ship when we thought the world was flat, ready to set sail to have the pursuit of happiness. And that's what runs through our blood, right? We don't want communism. We don't want what they have in North Korea. We don't want that for our children. We want the freedom. I mean, I am a Christian, so, my faith is that we were in the garden with the freedom to choose, right? And you are the basis of our founding fathers is rooted in ultimate freedom to choose. He stands at the door and knocks. He does not barge his way in. So if you believe in those biblical principles, it's still the freedom to say no thank you and choose your own path. And I think that's where people get, Christians, mixed up, that we're judging or we're forcing things on them. But that's not really biblical. That's really not what Jesus did. He sat in the dirt. He flipped the tables over. He had righteous anger, and he said, my children are supposed to run free in the garden, naked. And as a hospice nurse, I tell everyone, we're making it back to the garden. But this time we're going to be a lot smarter. We're not going to pick that damn apple. We're not getting back here. So, my perspective is we're coming from victory. I know that this is all here by intelligent design. I know an appeal to heaven as what created this country. And I do believe that we will spiral until there's a bit of a revival, but I do think we have to move out of the church age. I feel like everything has been so corrupted with money, and our ability to access things on the internet has led to distortion of what sexuality is and the beauty to create life, and to something that's it's been cheapened. It's supposed to be for companionship and to have someone understand you, and the heartbeat of what a human longs for, right? And yet now let's embrace, something that is just not that fulfilling, yeah. And it's just not as deep as it was probably intended to be, not to judge it, but it just makes me sad. Like, humans are supposed to be walking in prosperity and abundance and free, run free in the naked, in the garden, go fishing, go do what you want to do, and yet we're so heavy, and it's so dark, and it's so much despair. And I just feel like there is revival that's happening, and for us to be free indeed, and to respect and love each other, and just really fully get into this space of we're bringing it back. to what it was intended to be versus jumping out of a high-rise building in psychosis in China. Like, the contrast to me is so glaring. So, I don't care about your race, religion, your sexual orientation, your political views. If you want freedom, then we need to go up against this establishment together. And it needs to be a government that's for the people, by the people. It needs to be Uncle Joe that you know is going to let you live your life the way you want to live it, as long as you're not harming somebody else. It really doesn't need to be complicated. But there's millions of dollars, there's money laundering, there's drug cartels, there's sex trafficking. We've got crime all over the place. Our schools are a hot mess. Our hospitals are a hot mess. We have $45 million going into our school district for 1,800 children. And yet our children's test scores are horrible.
That's in Concord.
That's in Merrimack Valley School District. And our property taxes are killing people, right? They're killing our elderly. They're killing everybody. And so, if you're paying 60% of your property taxes and it's going to the school district, but then, like you guys said, nobody's showing up to the school district meetings, and we're electing people in who are managing millions of dollars with no accountability. Or I go to the executive council meeting every 2 weeks at the Capitol. $500 million goes through that room in 2 hours. And there's only probably 3 or 4 of us constituents there. The rest are all lobbyists or DHHS. And they go up and they're, $45 million for electronic ticketing system at Cannon Mountain that turns to $1.7 million contracted to a company in Rhode Island. I mean, the money
We
laundering.
can't fund schools, though. Constitutionally, we're supposed to, but we don't have the money to do that.
You go through the agenda, 17 pages long, $500 million. There's not one item in there for a veteran. There's money in there for refugees from Afghanistan and Ukraine, but there's not one item for. And in the meantime, in the news that same day is, the homeless camp in Manchester. And, I know for a fact we've moved kids out of the Sununu Center, where all the corruption happened, into residential homes that are contracted through Easter Seals and Waypoint and all these other entities. But again, there's still zero oversight. And they're hiring people for $12, $13 an hour to watch these kids who have come from trauma that are difficult. And I can tell you, they're not in a loving home with a dog and a fireplace going on. And these are the kids that grow up to end up homeless or in jail, we've got to get to the root of the problems. And yet I know it's $340 a day that we're paying for these children to be cared for as taxpayers. And I can tell you, when they went to Canopy Lake, all of the ones in residential homes weren't going to be allowed to go because the agency said they couldn't afford to buy them food in the park. So I threw them a pizza party in the parking lot. I'm the type of person, you give me the problem, we're going to figure out a way to fix it. Because it doesn't need to be complicated.
Yeah.
Tim
That's
says
awesome.
that all the time. I'll give you credit. That's that's almost verbatim how Tim words it.
It's not complicated.
You've said it at board meetings. You've said it on the show.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like my background is a business owner, and so I fix problems every day. And like I had a sewer and drain company, so I fix your problem like that day, or worst case, like we had to dig up your pipe, and so the next day, or maybe even the day after. But like I fix problems, and I do it then. I don't talk about it, think about it, research it, do a million things, basically to come up with we can't do that. No, we just fix the problem. And that's what gets me with government, is because it's not that complicated.
Right.
You don't have to be super smart. Like I don't have a business degree. I've learned everything on the job, and I'd argue it's pretty successful. And you don't need that. You don't need any of that. So much of it's common sense. Mm-hmm. And then in the aspect of this stuff is like, do you care about your community? Do you care about people? Like, no, it doesn't matter if you believe in God, don't believe in God. None of this matters, because we all should get along, because the common goal is the same.
Right.
Which is what they want. Like, I have a friend that's like super progressive, Bernie Sanders, the whole thing. Like, well, I have a conversation with her, and I could talk to her for hours. She's like, here's the thing. Like, and everything she's saying, I'm like, what the hell? I don't even get it. Like, where's the difference? Because I don't see the difference whatsoever. She's like, we agree on 90% of the stuff. There's probably 10% we don't. But they as in the people that are in power, don't want you to think that we all get along, because that way, if we all got along, we'd wake up and be like, what is going on?
Participate together
Right.
and say, you're out. The
I actually-
535
Yeah,
in Washington would be gone quick.
it's amazing. Like, I avoided the DMV because I don't like bureaucratic crap, right? And so, but I was down at the Capitol. There was a day of legislation going through that they do public testimony here in New Hampshire, which is unique to New Hampshire. And anyone can go and you can just listen. I always go last because I want to hear everyone's argument and then kind of wrap it up. And then the committee goes back and decides whether they're moving forward or they're going to amend or change things. And it was all 2A stuff, and so I was able to say, my first amendment was violated, and the 2A would back that up, right? Like, I don't want to be China jumping out of the high rise. That's all I'm saying. But afterwards, the version of me on the progressive side came up to me outside, and the man I was sitting with was a disabled vet, Brian, who's on crutches, really bad back pain, but on his jacket he had the 3% logo. And she wanted to take pictures, and she was like, and he was explaining to her the real history behind that versus how it's been demonized. And I was trying to talk with her, kind of like you were with your friend. And afterwards, as I was driving home, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to invite her to lunch, mom to mom. I'm sure she has a hard time wrapping her head around my political ideology, just like I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around some of her political ideology. And if we don't stop and try to understand, then how do we
move forward?
Yeah,
you're stuck.
How do we do this? And so I'm still waiting for her to respond to my invite, but I think extending that olive branch over, because I've been made aware that they are here to divide us. They want us so fighting with each other that they can come in and implement this communism without us realizing what's happened. And, I said last week, I wonder if in Germany they were too busy to get involved. And I feel like that's where we're at. We've been given this little sliver of opportunity to get our act together. And what an amazing historical time we're living in. Like, if we can grasp that we're living in a really spectacular time of history and optimize our story, I think, being a hospice nurse, I look at life a lot differently than other people because I know how quickly it goes. And I want every day to have purpose. And so I have to keep reminding myself not everyone sees it that way. People wake up, they're in their routine. It's hard to think about going to a school board meeting or getting involved in some other way. But I try to be realistic, too, with everything I do, that I want it to be something that people can quickly grab and do versus just talking about it. And that can, a 5-minute activity that matters. I think just the fact that they're looking at the group and seeing the numbers grow so rapidly, that in itself freaks them out. And so, there's little things like that there is strength and safety in numbers. As we say, we want a government that's for the people, by the people, not just something that they've already selected who's going to represent us and spent $500 million to get them elected with ad campaigns that are blatantly lies.
This last
Like
ad
blatant
cycle,
lies.
oh man, the amount of paper crap that got mailed to the house for it was a Hassan machine. Hassan, excuse me. Just insane.
How many people could we have helped
Yeah.
that are having a hard time with their property taxes or having a hard time?
Yeah.
Or you just donate it to the school districts across the state.
Mm-hmm. How many teachers could we have hired? How many,
Yeah. I was talking to Steve earlier, and I was like, hey, you ever heard of Benny, was it Johnson? And so he does a podcast out of Miami, I guess. And so I watched a video yesterday. He went to East Palestine, and he went to like the 20 closest houses to the train derailment and gave them $1,000 each cash. And they're like, well, what's the strings? What's the, one guy's like, you're not from the train company, are you? Like, thinking he's going to get the wool pulled over his eyes. And he's like, that was as easy as that. Like, I make money doing the show. We decided we're going to take the money, and this is more important. And it's like, you don't need the federal government because we already stand up for ourselves, and and come together anyways.
That's the one thing about America that a lot of other countries don't have is
Right.
and I think it's our Christian background because our rights come from God, and that's how we were formed as a country, and so we give generously, regardless of political ideation.
I got to tell you, when I was doing the foster care ministry, I had to close the chapter because this just became the next chapter of my story. But I would put out, hey, we need a basketball hoop for a kid, and within an hour, someone was Amazoning, sending it to that family, that foster family, or a bicycle or whatever it was. And the thing is, I would rather take my $20 and go buy a jar of peanut butter and some Gatorade or whatever and give it directly to that person who's struggling on the street than to send it to Washington and hope that any of it's going to make it back. And we should be pissed, and we should be at that executive council meeting. We have a gentleman, Adam. He was a construction worker driving his truck, and a brick went through the windshield and hit him in the forehead. He ended up in a coma for a year in the hospital. He came out with a public guardian. All of his equipment was gone. His house was gone. His children. And they didn't think he was going to live. Well, he's completely rehabilitated himself back. I mean, he's got some deficiencies and his short-term memory's bad, but he's a very intelligent man. He's still under a public guardian. He reached out to me. The public guardian hadn't seen him for over a year. His case manager had only talked to him on the phone once. He had had no health care, no disability, no shelter. He was living in a friend's camp. No PT, no OT. There's something called Choices for Independence that I'm aware of that we pay for. So as an individual under a public guardian, you're like the parent. You're supposed to make sure this person's taken care of. And so I called the guardian. I called the case manager. I started to question things. And all of a sudden, where's his CFI? Where's his disability? Where's his housing? And he really just wants to go to court and say, I think I don't need a public guardian and I don't need the government. I think I'm independent to move my story forward. And they're stifling him. So these are the type of individuals that end up going homeless. But do you know how much we're paying as taxpayers for Adam? $400 a day.
And that's going to what, his guardian?
And it's going to this outside agency that the government has contracted to case manage his case.
$400 a day, and he's talked to him one time on the phone.
And he's homeless.
Yeah. With no
That
food
should scare
stamps.
everybody.
No food stamps, no housing. No. So if you're a Democrat and you feel as though the government's there to be the safety net for Adam, I'm here to tell you Adam's $400 a day is not getting to Adam. So, if that's a government for the people, by the people, it's not, right? So even if we decide we need social welfare programs, we need to infiltrate in order to take those programs back so that the foster kids are actually getting well cared for, that there's some sort of oversight. The other thing I've learned in my journey here about New Hampshire is we're one of only 2 states in the United States that has absolutely zero oversight over foundations. So if you look up NHPR, which is more,
Yeah, New Hampshire Public Radio is definitely liberal.
and in New Hampshire Public Radio, and you look up Pandora Papers, New Hampshire, you'll see a really comprehensive few articles in there about the $934 billion we have in foundations here in New Hampshire that have no oversight. So there was legislation passed through the Secretary of State that if the Banking Commissioner and the Secretary of State feel that the foundation is trustworthy, they don't need to audit them. So you go down that path, that's a lot of money.
almost $1
$932
trillion.
billion. It's almost as much as we spend on our military, right?
Yeah.
I don't know the recent numbers. It's a lot of money in the hills here of New Hampshire. And so you start to wonder why Epstein's Maxwell was here and the Shaheens, and we hear about, money laundering, sex trafficking, drug trafficking,
Cartels
cartels.
up here in New Hampshire somehow.
And, I was just like, no, I ride my horse and I see streams and brooks and live free or die and no property or no sales tax, no income tax. I was like, are you kidding me? And then come to find out, oh my gosh, we might be the belly of the beast. And
So we're like Grand Cayman, where people put their money because there's no there's no taxes whatsoever. So if you open a bank in the Grand Cayman Islands, which, people often do, but then if you do, usually then the IRS is after you because, but New Hampshire,
It's
it's
a little
legal.
Switzerland.
It's just like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, Switzerland would be another one. Yeah, or you could just,
It's disheartening.
yeah.
It's disheartening on many levels, and I mention it on the show all the time, and I'm just going to mention it again because you mentioned soldiers. How about telling our soldiers, this is on the national, not on the state level, but telling them, go on food stamps. So we're going to send billions of dollars to Ukraine. We can't pull out a little bit of that and give it to our soldiers who are risking their lives all around the world. You know what I mean? So we're sending them out there, and it's like, go get some food stamps. Then feed your family that way. Like, I would...
So there's so many.
I have issue with that because how disrespectful. Now you want those men and women to risk their lives, risk their families' livelihoods
So
for food stamps.
I said I was born and raised in California, Ventura County, and the last 7 years I was in California before we moved here 24 years ago was San Diego. And I was in my 20s, and I drove Volkswagens, which are easy to break into. And out there you don't have to have full coverage insurance, just liability, and my car kept getting stolen. Every time I come out of work, my car was gone again. And 3 times in 1 year with no coverage, so it was just total loss. Plus you had sales tax when you buy a car, so it was like upside down. And here I'm trying to get ahead, and that was part of the reason I left San Diego and moved east, was the crime was so crazy being that close to the border, you just couldn't even try to get ahead and function. And so, now knowing that the border crisis is so much worse, and I was actually going to Azusa Pacific, which is right on the hills of East LA when the Rodney King riots broke out before we moved down to San Diego. And that left an impression. I was 18, 19 years old. And when things go bad, they go bad really fast, like really fast. So I've always been like, wow, I can't count on anyone to really keep us safe because when anarchy happens, like, watch out. Humans become very, like a caged animal, scared for preservation. And so this
Primal instincts take over.
Yeah, this false sense of, we're all okay has always been in the back of my mind, like, at any minute things could go crazy. So you can have that backdrop, and, I'm just looking across and just like I don't know, between the border, between knowing that our social welfare programs are so incredibly broken and just a conduit for more extortion, I just feel like we need to just clean house. And you know what? There's a very easy way for us to do it. One of the other things I've learned in my journey, which was a big shocker, I'm still digesting this, is that in November, the Sunday before the general election, we do a weekly Zoom call as a group. I had a lot of libertarian leadership jump on the call, and they were very hostile that they wanted the group to change directions on who we were pointing people to for the Senate race. We were pointing to Bolduc, and they wanted us to switch to Kaufman. And they were very, very aggressive. I mean, to the point where one of them went out on Twitter and did a parody of me. They went after my employer's social media. They went after my nursing license. And I was like, what the hockey puck is going on? And I've been now made aware that, my libertarians, which I always thought were just, live your life as long as you're not hurting anyone. Somebody came to me and said, T, you understand that sometimes they'll do things that are below the radar as far as, they don't like laws, so they might be doing some gun trafficking or some internet, money exchanges and things that if the feds wanted to come in and yank one of them and put him in jail, they could in a dime. So, because part of me was like, why aren't they rising up? Like, where's all our libertarian? You guys all moved here from out of state. I'm kind of a free state project person. I moved from California before the free state thing happened. But this whole time I'm like, you all move here for freedom, but where are you? Like, right. I just didn't see them like rising up and like putting up a bunch of good candidates. And I know like they get together for like different, events, but I was like, this is a huge population. Where are they all? And someone just made me aware that they don't get involved because they don't want to rock the cart because they don't want the feds coming after them. And I was like, what? Like, I hadn't even digested that, as a possibility. And I'm not saying all of them.
Yeah, not all.
Right, of course.
Because I was a libertarian, and then I'm like,
oh, I know so many that are phenomenal and are amazing. But what has happened is there's this huge population of libertarians that are feeling very displaced right now, and that their leadership is kind of a hot mess. And there's some that are very, very anarchy, like very, like, to the point where, oof, that's too far. I don't agree with that. That's a moral, boundary that's appropriate for the safety of a culture or society or our children or whatever. And then you've got Republicans that are getting kicked to the curb. We try and go to the county meetings. I use the analogy, it's like going to a church where Mr. Smith sat in the same seat for 30 years, and you go in as the newbie and you sit in his seat, and they're all just like, not good with that.
Right.
So you've got a bunch of Republicans that are feeling like, wow, like we're not even being embraced for getting involved. You've got libertarians that are like, what the heck is going on? Hassan was not a good choice. There's no way switching our vote was going to be in the best interest for our kids in the long run. And that's not freedom to say you're going to do this or that, and then you've got Democrats that are really realizing too, I think, that these welfare programs we've set up with the best of intentions and heart are not making it to the people. So, it's a new day. It's time to do something different.
That's the thing I said this so many times, ever since, so I graduated in 2001, kind of towards the end of my high school career is kind of when everyone started to get a trophy, and, there wasn't winners and losers. It started there, which was like a wicked downfall of kids, because there are winners and losers, and there are, doesn't mean you're a loser as a person because you lose a game, but everyone should, strive for the best. And but we've been doing it their way for more than 20 years now. The more leftist kind of everyone's a victim is now kind of what it's got to the point. And I'm like, no, I'm done with this. We've done it your way for more than 20 years. It's gone nothing from here to way, way worse.
Online and look at our competencies over the last 20 years.
It's horrible.
Our anxiety rates, our suicide rates, our depression rates, people are miserable. And I think the reality is humanity, for the most part, it's like everyone pull up your bootstraps. We're here to be responsible for ourselves. When someone truly is unable, they're doing their best, and they're, an Adam or whoever, and they need those of us who are able-bodied to step up and care for them. I believe humanity will do that. I've seen it demonstrated when I did my foster care ministry. And as a nurse going into our nursing home facilities, there needs to be a camera in every school classroom. There needs to be a camera in every one of these nursing home facilities, because I'm telling you, these people are they're not even getting water brought to their lips.
I can tell you from firsthand experience in Texas, they're understaffed. They're not hiring the best of people. Because my dad, I'm paying I'm not, but my
it's like
mom
$30,000-$40,000 a month for them
money
to be here, and they don't have people to put water to their lips. Who's getting that money? Who is getting that money?
Administrators.
Definitely not the LNA that's making,
No,
16, 17.
Everything is like the investors. Everybody has an investor, or there's not a, Tim owns the company, and Tim's like, I'm proud of this. I'm going to make it right when it's necessary, right? I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean,
times, but they don't do that anymore, and now it's like they don't even apologize.
Right.
There's nobody we talk about it all the time.
Right. So,
if you're an apology would go a long way with people, because then it shows that you acknowledge that you did something wrong, and now we can move forward past that. But until you acknowledge that you've wronged someone or a group or whatever in any way, you can't move past it.
I'm all for Medicare or Social Security, but when 80% of it's going into the pocket of whoever is the big conglomerate that owns those nursing home chains,
Right.
and Grandma Rose is not getting hydrated,
and that's what really, I know we're here to interview you, but I have to get this off my chest. Your loved ones are in a hospital, and they're not allowing you in to see them when they're passing away and you're not there. That should be a wake-up call for any citizen of this country to say, that's not right. if your mom, dad, granny, grandma, child is sick and ill, and they keep you from them, that I got issue with that.
Yeah, I mean,
especially knowing what we know now and what we knew then. If you wanted to look, the survival rates.
So obviously, being a nurse and being catapulted into the front line all through the pandemic, I had people call me and say, T, my mom just went to the ICU. She has COVID. I'm scared. What do I do? Is she going to come out alive? And I'd be like, let me call the charge nurse. Let me talk to the nurse that it's assigned. Let me see what the labs look like today. And I would call, and for a full year, I'd have like four to eight of these cases going at any given time. I would call, and it would be a brand new graduate nursing student that didn't know what to ask for the hospitalist. The hospitalist was straight out, and I would just be like, hey, they've been there 2 weeks. Have we started them on total nutrition, TPN, which is by IV? And, oh, no. Okay, well, we're not on nutrition. Like, the body's not going to turn a corner. And then, get the hospitalist on and, what do the labs look like today? And they're in the ICU. And I cannot even tell you how many times I heard, oh, we didn't run labs today. Well, why didn't you run labs? Well, because it's viral. Yeah, but they're laying on, like, warm, dark, moist, sugary fluid. That's a petri dish for bacteria. So even though it was viral yesterday, doesn't mean that it hasn't turned bacterial today. And I'm telling you, 99% of the time, it had turned bacterial once we got the labs and we looked at them. And then we would advocate with the hospitals to hang an IV bag of antibiotics for the bacterial infection. And 9 times out of 10, that bag wouldn't be hung for another 48 hours. By then, the person was septic. And it was just over and over and over. And then the right to try. We have one father who was a single dad who'd gotten his life together to get his son back. This miracle story dad. He ended up in Portsmouth Hospital. We ended up going all the way through the court system, the right to try. Praise God, he made it out alive. And that was probably the scariest case I worked on, because I knew his 11-year-old little boy needed his daddy back. But the reality is, like, as soon as someone tested positive, there is no harm in giving them a proven medication that is safe, that's used around the world for human consumption. And we didn't know what we didn't know, but if there was a chance that might have kept the symptoms from progressing, why not? Yeah. Why not do it to everyone who tested positive? And that was like the biggest question right out of the gate. Like, we could have saved all these hospital stays. We could have saved lives from getting worse. And now we know that is true, that it was effective. And, McCall was one of my girlfriends I went to, that I know that's a nurse practitioner. And she said when she got the email from Concord Hospital that said, if you prescribe this particular medication off-label, you will be terminated. Right then and there, she knew she was going into private practice, and she started her exit plan, and she got out because she saw right away that was a red flag. I had a nursing instructor that had us watch Nurses of the Third Reich, the corrupt nurses. You can Google it, and it's a documentary on how the Holocaust happened, and it happened with the nurses getting orders and, having to make beds for the soldiers. So now if there's someone mentally ill, or there's someone in a coma, or there's an abandoned orphan baby, we're going to go ahead and do this just to make room for the soldiers, because that's the priority, and they had justified it all. But, just this awakening of, we can't participate in something. We take an oath to do no harm. And that's what I testified. I said, you, as clinicians, if we do harm, you can hold us accountable, right? But you asked us not to do something that we thought could potentially benefit our patient. I was lucky I was never in a position where I had to take or give the injection. Praise God. He saved me from that in my profession. But you asked doctors to do things that went against their oath to do no harm.
Yeah, then they silenced all the doctors that spoke out against it, and the reason
on the Twitter files.
Yeah, and the reason you didn't want to take ivermectin is because they couldn't make any money off of it.
No, that's because they couldn't make it an EUA. If it turned out to be effective, you can't get an emergency use authorization if something else can treat it.
Well,
allegedly.
What I tell people is just go out to the World Economic Forum, type in the word Agenda 2030. It's no longer tinfoil hat. So it used to be, no, they're not culling people. They're not taking out. So if you look at our baby boomers, when I went through nursing school 13 years ago, I was told we're going to have a crisis, a healthcare crisis, because we're going to have all the baby boomers hitting the nursing homes at the same time. And we're going to have nursing, people retiring. We don't have enough new staff coming on board. And at the same time, we just talked about nursing home is $30,000 a month. So if you look at this from a business perspective, okay, which I was in corporate America, and you have a huge population that's costing you $30,000 a month, and they're no longer a revenue base for your taxes. I mean, if you're running a farm and you have a bunch of cattle that are no longer producing milk, and they're costing you 100 times more than your younger livestock, what do? You cull, right? And so when you step back and you go to the World Economic Forum, you go to these world leaders, they're looking at this as a business model. And they have a rationale, and they have it justified, and they're looking at climate change, and they're saying, okay, the population of the world in our mind's eye needs to be managed. Some feel as though it's more nefarious than that if they can keep the population to a certain size, they can kind of keep their power and control. And so that's kind of their motivation, because the world really isn't overpopulated, and there's not the numbers to really back that. But you listen and you go to their website, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, Agenda 2030, which they have decided they need to accelerate. It is in plain daylight that they feel as though they need to depopulate the Earth's population, and that they need to control climate and put particles in the air. I mean, it's all right there in front of us. So my analogy for this is that's like my husband saying, where's the ketchup? And it's right there on the front shelf of the refrigerator, but he hasn't even opened the refrigerator door to look for it.
The best kept secrets are right in plain sight.
So it's right in broad daylight, exactly what their intent is. And when you have Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, write the book, The Great Reset, give it to all the world leaders, and it's right there that they're going to use this pandemic to reform global policy, and that China is the role model. It's right there. The ketchup bottle is right there.
I wonder why people don't look. Is it? You think it's a psychology thing? Like once they know
The
the
media.
truth, they can't unsee it.
So our media is controlled, right? And I mean, the beauty is that what are people addicted to right now? Their phones. And really, we can praise God that we have that, right? Because we can be the media. We can do what we're doing right now. We can get out to people. We can talk to them. But I believe humanity was meant to be in community. And we didn't, if you go back to the 1900s, we only, like Laura Ingalls days, or, Dr. Quinn, medicine woman, right? We only knew what was going on in our town. Like, we knew Mr. Jones was sick, or somebody's barn burned down, or whatever. And we would come together as a community, and we could tolerate the emergencies in that small setting. We weren't meant, I believe, to understand the crisis globally. I think our brains are just like completely overwhelmed with crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis. So I think we have to be very intentional to, be taking care and guarding ourselves, that we're getting enough sleep, we're getting enough hydration, we're decompressing, going to the ocean, we're going out to the woods, we're doing something to move ourselves away from this chaos, right? And then we take our power back. We need to get on the offense. So we need to say, no, that is not okay. And, every day I wake up and, Lord, what is it you want me to do this day? What is it this day you want me to do, Lord? And it might be responding to the dad who has a concern about a teacher at a school. It might be to come to a podcast. And then I just really try to say, okay, what action item can I give people that will bear fruit, that will matter? And I do my best work in the barn, cleaning out my stalls. And about a year ago, he gave me the word resolve. You have to have the resolve to go the distance. And you just need 30 people. I'm like, what do you mean we just need 30 people? You find 30 people with integrity that are going to do right and not do it for nefarious reasons in the state of New Hampshire. Do you believe you could find 30 people, Terese? I was like, yeah, I think I could find 30 people. And then it wasn't until later that day that where did the 30 number come from? Why did that float through my brain? And it was the governor, 5 executive council members, and 24 state senate seats. And it was basically, if you got 30 people in those spots, you would basically deroot at the top. You know, it doesn't mean we don't do the school boards and work from the bottom too, but I think this has got to be a death by 1,000 cuts. And then, you know, I started noodling the numbers and going out to the Secretary of State and how many people participate in the primary, how many people would we have to get behind these 30 people to actually move them in. And reality is, I don't want to be down there doing executive council by myself with 29 rats. But if you tell me I'm going down there with 30 people like me to completely clean it and make sure people like Adam are our foster kids, that we're following the money and it's actually getting to the people who need it, hell yeah, sign me up. And if you're telling me you're going to do it and I don't have to go blow smoke up everyone's bum in all these New Hampshire GOP meetings and go up against the establishment by myself or spend $1 million in mailers into a mailbox, yes, sign me up. All of a sudden, then we get better inventory. We get people who normally wouldn't even think to run as a because they're not politicians, that are willing to say, I'm willing to get on the field and play this football game. I'll move from being outside the stadium to not just in the bleachers, to being down on the bench, to getting out on the field. But I want a team there with me. And I feel like I've had people say, Terese, you just need to take one bite of the apple at a time. You're trying to eat the whole thing in one bite. And I'm like, we don't have time to inch this. Like, we need to take it back. And I really felt like 2020, like, we need to take it back. And I tried to institute this whole idea, but we only had 3 months. Right. And we did. We got 15,000 people. We got Barbara Griffin and Brody Deshays and Chuck Moore, like some of the establishment picks. We got out, and that was a lot of fun. And we made a ruckus. I mean, Governor Sununu picked on the wrong redhead because I didn't go away. It just being arrested, people were like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I'm like, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry, because it motivated me to do something. And I don't know that I would have to this degree had it not happened. So it kind of boomeranged on him. But, you know, the reality is now we have 19 months. And if each county can just find 6 solid people, we will raise up good inventory. So people get upset about these candidates and, oh, it was all behind Bolduc, and then he did this with election integrity, or he supported Nikki Haley, and I don't know what to think of him now, and we're all upset. But the reality is, this is like playing a card game, right? And you've been handed a hand, and we get our hand and we don't like it, but we can't discard and pick up new inventory because there's nothing else there.
Right.
If we had really beautiful inventory, we could play the game a lot better. So my thought is, let's get our inventory by May 31st this year. Let's get every county to get some strong leads. Let's identify and go to those people and say, hey, will you do the job for us? Uncle John, you're not going to go down by yourself. You're going to go down with 29 more people just like you. Will you give it a shot for just one term? And if we can rally the block vote to get you across the finish line and get you in that seat, will you do the job for us? And then we have to assemble the vote. If each one of us just got 10 other people, we don't need $30 million from the Hassan campaign feeding us lies to get more brokenness elected. We are small enough in New Hampshire. So it's 140,000 people that participate in the primaries. And so we need half of that, right? So 75,000 people. The Facebook group has had 118,000 people view it in the last 60 days. And I'm reading a book right now called The Tipping Point. I don't know if you guys have read it, no. But it goes back, and I remember this from my corporate America days, that if you have a campaign and you have just 3% response rate, it's considered a successful campaign. And I always knew that. And then I remembered Brian's 3% thing and the history. And so someone recommended this book, and I'm going through this book, and it's talking about the run on the toilet paper and the Tickle Me Elmos, and why all of a sudden something becomes like everyone's got to have it. And 3% of the population, if you can get them talking about something and breeding awareness about something, they're about 80% of the population are watchful waiting fence riders. So they're kind of like really busy. It's not a bad thing. They're just like mechanics and working 10 hours a day, and they don't really know that Tickle Me Elmo's what their kid wants for Christmas until all of a sudden it's everywhere. But that 80% will all of a sudden avalanche and snowball once you get to those numbers. So 3% of all of New Hampshire, I'm a numbers person, we have 1.4 million people approximately in New Hampshire. That doesn't scrub out those that are under the age of 18 that aren't voting age, so but we'll use the 1.4 number, would be 45,000 people. So we need 45,000 people in New Hampshire to link arms and say, we are going to create inventory that is by the people, for the people, and we're going to do that by June 1st of this year, and we're going to get the word out for a full year going into 2024, and we're taking New Hampshire back. We say that we are first in the nation. That might change.
Yeah.
But we've spoken those words over ourselves, and we're on granite. We're on solid ground. And there's a lot of history here in New Hampshire. If you look at the Appeal to Heaven and the Pine Tree Riots and the Constitution. And what's really cool is Jason, who was one of the first ones to stand outside of Concord Hospital with me, and he has such a story. He just got elected as state rep, and he's like a little brother to me. I'm just, every time, he's just so excited to take back this and be part of history. He's just really energizing to be around. But he said, Terese, did you know this? And he's like, you got to look at this link. And I get thousands of links sent to me, but I open it up. And before our Constitution, they sat down to ratify the Constitution, they had something called the resolves. And it was all these bullet points of what they wanted
That's cool.
That's pretty cool.
it to look like. And when I came up with the word resolve, I had no idea. I must have been asleep if that was even taught in history, but I talked to people and they're like, no, I never heard of the resolves. The sulfic resolves is what was the original outline that created our Constitution that was ratified. And New Hampshire has the oldest, and so there's all this history here. And when I saw that, I felt like I was being visited by a ghost of our forefathers. Like, why did that word go into my head?
Right.
But you think about the word resolve, that means you don't give up. Whether we sink or swim, whether we find ourselves jumping out of high-rise buildings like in China, 10 years from now, and we don't win the battle, at least we know we gave it everything we possibly had. And I'm not willing to give up. And so it's simple. It's a simple model. Everyone can be a leader. Everyone can grab this. Everyone can put in who they think Uncle John or whoever it is should be representing them. But we can't get upset with the candidates when we didn't do our part. We will reap what we sow. And again, out at the barn, I don't know, how are we doing on time? Am I boring everybody?
No, you're fine.
So I was out at the barn, and I have a donkey. She's a redheaded donkey. And she went over and she picked up an apple out of the paddock. And we have this apple tree that's on the outside of the paddock. And all of a sudden it hit me. My daughter, who's now 20, she had seen a video on America's Funniest Video where a horse would go and bump its rump up against a trunk of a tree, and the apples would fall, and it'd go around and pick up the apples. And she was about 7 at the time, and she said, Mom, I want an apple tree for our horses. And so every time she ate an apple, she'd go and plant the core somewhere around the paddock, outside of the paddock. And now she's 20, and I was watching this donkey go and eat this apple off the paddock floor. And it was like, I heard this thought come through my head that don't think that it's too late. Start doing right now what you want to see 10 years from now. Get going, get going, get going. And there's a group, we met Saturday, there's a group that are looking at the Constitution Party, which is the 5th largest party in the United States. It's 30 years old, the platform is beautiful, but to get out from the uniparty, get out from the drama. And there's a large population that really do not want to affiliate their name any longer to the Republican Party, that are feeling displaced. And so this team is going down the path and securing the trade name and getting the EIN number and wanting to launch. And, I'm looking at what they're doing, and everyone that I'm talking to do my diligence about this idea, they're like, yeah, we really should have started it. We looked at it 10 years ago. We should have started it then. We looked at it 8 years. We should have started it then. And I'm like, okay,
I think
No better day than today.
Right.
Third parties don't usually do well. I think we have to be very strategic, but it is a new day and different things are happening now than what have ever historically happened. And so, to go allow them to just run down that path and, they're excited about it, let them launch. And, we can walk, crawl, run. We can still run people as Republicans with a Constitution Party endorsement. We can wait until the umbrella is big enough to have ballot access, but this is the point in time where, we all just have to get in the game and start doing and pray that we watch a donkey eating an apple off the paddock floor in 10 years. And we're glad that we planted the seeds.
Something we said, like I say a lot now on the show, is so I have older children. I have some still in school, but then I have a 3-year-old, and then my wife's pregnant. So like I have two young girls that, like, what kind of life do I want them to have? What kind of world do I want them to live in? And I refuse to just sit here and be like, oh, where were you when this was all going down? I was just sitting here on my hands and doing nothing. Like, you have to be able to look at your kids and be like, well, what did you do to stop this from becoming China? Or, everyone's like, oh, that's a conspiracy. I hate this conspiracy theory crap because it's funny because you're a conspiracy theorist. Well, no, that's just a word you try to use to shut me down. But, okay, what was the conspiracy? This was. Well, that was proven true. And this was true. Like, all the conspiracy theories have come true.
Right.
So when do you wake up and say, okay, we need to pay attention?
Right.
It's happening right in front of your eyes, and it's gone unchecked for so long. Like, this system only works with checks and balances.
Mm-hmm.
There's been no checks. So now to get it back, it's not going to be easy.
No,
but you have to.
It's like an old house that has 1,000 layers of paint on her. And you can barely see the original, And so we're going to have to nullify. We're going to have to strip it back. But we didn't get here in a day. We're not going to fix it in a day. And I think even if we have a new blood that is for the people, by the people, who understand the heartbeat of the Constitution, people say, you don't have any rights because you don't know them. And I'm like, no, we don't have any rights right now because we don't have any rights. You guys are all, from a hospice nurse perspective, you're in the denial phase and you're in the bargaining phase of, well, that's not constitutional. Well, it wasn't constitutional that I was arrested for uttering the word amen. It's not constitutional, the way people are being chilled right now in our country, and our court systems are just as much of a hot mess as anything else too. So that can be our goalpost and when we get back to, but I think just accountability and getting people in there with common sense. Let's say, wait a minute, here's Adam, his case study, let's follow this. What happened here? Why is he not getting his $400 a month? Or what's happening that these people are getting $30,000 in Medicare a month going to Merrimack County Nursing Home, and yet there's not an LNA to give them water? Let's follow it. And it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to then fix it because it's like the ketchup bottle. It's like right there. But just as of yesterday, I was called extremist and the FBI is watching me. And I'm like, guys, go get your coffee and donut. The Christian foster mom that, registered nurse hospice, like, I'm not here to do anyone any harm. But, as soon as you step in and you go against the narrative, and it's like, no, our 6, 7, and 8-year-olds don't need to be confused by a teacher coming in that one day is wearing female clothing, the next day wearing male clothing, next day female clothing, next day male clothing. And then we look at the social media, and there's quite a bit that's very alarming that this individual is mentally not appropriate to be working with children. We bring that forward. It's affirmed that, yes, an investigation needs to happen. You're in a school district where you've had several occasions where individuals have gone to work that were sex trafficking children and doing things that were inappropriate. That's where predators will go. So we need to be diligent and vigilant to ask questions and to inquire if something's appropriate without being told we're transphobic, we're anti-gay, we're against alternative lifestyles, that we're an extremist group, that we're hateful. No, I have family and friends that adore me and I adore them, that have all kinds of sexual preferences, different political views, different religious beliefs, and we all love and respect each other, but we do not force it on each other's children.
Right.
So that, our children need to go to school at $20,000 a year, or whatever it is, depending on school district, $10,000 to $20,000 a year, and come out and be able to read. Let's just focus on that. I really don't want my 7-year-old coming home and saying, Mimi, can I wear your lipstick and heels today? Because, Mr. Jones is, and he's prepubescent. He doesn't need to be confused yet. Let's let him sort it out and figure it out and shepherd it as he goes through those parts of his developmental age. Can we teach everyone to love and respect each other? Absolutely. And if anyone's being shamed or bullied or whatever, no, we teach children to be appropriate and be kind to everyone. But, so we're demonized, we're chilled, misunderstood. But, I think as long as we stay the course and we, invite those people to lunch to say, okay, let's sit down. I know you have a hard time wrapping your head around what I'm doing, and I want to understand your perspective, understand mine. Then we're combating this world effort to destroy. It's really a spiritual battle in my mind. It's evil and good. And one comes to kill, steal, and destroy, and one wants us to run in the garden naked and go fishing. So, which one do you want? And I believe this is what we're coming from victory. And our, like I said, he stands at the door and knocks. He's not going to intervene until we say, Dad, help. But how many dads, when their child says, Daddy, help me, say, no, I'm going to let you just, get into more trouble. No, your dad, a typical dad is going to come running to help its child. And I really just think that's where we're at. We need to cry out, and say, help us. And I think that appeal to heaven will come in. And again, he will stand at the door and knock. He's not going to barge his way in and force or judge. He came to save the world and redeem it, not to condemn it. And he wants us to be in the garden. And he does say, I will make all things new. So I know at some point we get back to what the original design is. And I believe I won't be eating that apple because I don't want to get back here to this hot mess. But while we're here, we're to tarry, and some people are like, oh, I'm praying. Okay, we were called to do. So this is for the believers out there. There's this huge craziness going on within just the Christian believers. And, oh, I'm going to pray and the world's going to end and there's nothing we can do about it. So we're just going to sit here and pray. No, Jesus did not sit in a pew and sit there and pray while children were being abused and people were starving and cold and our veterans were being, living under a bridge. No, he went and he flipped the tables over and we're supposed to be obedient to our rulers. Well, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego did not bend a knee and they ended up in the fiery furnace. And, Jesus came and he saved them. So we are supposed to stand up for what is right. He came to the world. That's a verb. He did something. We're supposed to get up and be doers, not just hearers. Faith without works is dead. He will spit you out of his mouth if you are lukewarm. And in Esther 4:14, it says, if you remain silent, you and your family will perish. For you were born for such a time as this.
No,
it doesn't get any more clear than that.
No, we talk about all the time. Like if you're complacent in it, and you know what's happening is wrong, and you know that it's happening, you're just as guilty as the person that's doing it.
Complacency is agreement.
Yes.
And even in biblical times, so you go to a wedding and the pastor says, anyone here see why this couple should not be married? If everyone says quiet, you're agreeing that it's okay that they get married. Right. That is how the covenants worked in the Old Testament. If the woman went and made a contract and the husband stayed silent, then he was in agreement with that and that he was bound by that contract. So, even in historical times, our complacency is agreement. You are perpetuating child abuse. You are perpetuating money laundering. You are perpetuating extortion. You're perpetuating the demise of our country. You are responsible, and you will need to digest that. Not to make anyone feel bad, but it's time to get up and get going, guys. And if you need to figure out how and what to do, it's simple. It's just as simple as getting connected with other liberty-minded, getting connected in your county, growing a county group, do a bonfire, do a potluck, do an ice cream social, and decide, we're all going to show up at the school board meeting for once. Or we're all going to make a phone call at the same time to one of our elected. Or, we're going to raise up that inventory for May 31st and make sure that we have good, solid people that we can believe in and help campaign for them. You know, we'll get a flyer with those top 30 names. Let's not door knock for one person. Let's door knock for 30. How much more effective is that, right?
Yeah.
And we can multiply our efforts, and we can do it with very little money. Or we can continue to work within the dysfunctional framework that's not been working. And it's really a simple choice. But our forefathers didn't, it wasn't meant to be this complicated.
No.
And you got people say, well, why bother voting? Because it's all corrupt and the machines are corrupt. And, you know, so just shut down. Who cares if we get good candidates, because they won't get elected with that. And my answer to that is we are lucky here in New Hampshire. There is an RSA that you can do what's called an overcount, and it forces your ballot to be hand counted. And then we raise up 200, 300, 400 people to go work those polls and watch. And I counted hand ballots. It was not that hard. And the group did. We raised up over 300 people to be poll workers, and we'll multiply that out. And we can force a hand count if we need to. And so, you know, you just have to keep fighting. And like you said, whether it be a football, business, there's a problem. What's our strategy to solve it?
How do people get involved? Like, how do they reach out to you?
So if you're on Facebook, I know a lot of people hate Facebook. I do too, but that is where most people still are. It is We the People NH. We the People NH is the Facebook group, the primary group. We have broken it down to We the People Sullivan County, New Hampshire, Merrimack County, New Hampshire. So we have county levels. We have We the People NH Public Schools. Everyone who's involved in school boards and public school and wants to collaborate on what's going on can meet there. And then we have a Telegram. We have Twitter, which I'm not very good about going out and doing the twitting. And in Instagram, we do have the website, wethepeoplenh.org. You can go out there. We're going to be going through and spending some intentional time on that this month to clean up from the 22 resolve slate and get it ready for 24. So, but we're out there, and you know, just connect with these guys, and we're here to be the wind in the sail for any Liberty group that's out there. We have 3 major initiatives we're going to be working on, and one is the slate and county leads and the launching of the Constitution Party. There's a group that's going to really wanted that when we pulled the team. And then continuing to participate in the New Hampshire GOP and trying to, we were at the annual meeting where Trump spoke. We made up about 30% of the room. And I guess historically we were about 5% of the room. So when we say we didn't know the rules of the game, for the New Hampshire Republican Party, you can be a delegate. And if you get voted in to be a delegate on your primary ballot in September, then you can vote to who's committee member at the state level for the party, and then the committee members get to go to an annual meeting to vote in the chair and vice chair of the party for the state. So, but not all counties let the delegates determine who got to be committee members. It was a lot of chaos. But anyways, we didn't know what we were doing. A bunch of us put our names in as delegates. A bunch of us became committee members. So we made up 30% of the room. Historically, I guess we were about 5% of the room. And we were able to get some resolutions and some amendments in at the end where the establishment tried to end the meeting before that would happen. There's a lot of drama that day. But our hope is to be 55% of the room come January next year so that we can continue to bring integrity back to the Republican Party here in New Hampshire. So that's like a whole nother podcast. But.
Right, absolutely. No, and thank you so much for coming out and talking about this. I know, I followed you for a while now and seen the progression and the amount of people that have joined and the amount of people involved. And, you know, we just talked, we're like, hey, we will let anyone on the show. We'd even let Sununu come on the show, but I highly doubt that'll ever happen. But, of course, we'd grill him on things, but as we would grill anyone. But, get involved, and that's what we're trying to get, people out, get involved. It's so simple. Even if it's going to a school board meeting or a selectman meeting, or you can't just sit back anymore and just be like, whatever. You gotta get involved, you know.
We do a Sunday Zoom call every night or every Sunday at 7 p.m. And I always try and have one tangible action item that people can do that week. Like this last one was reach out to your pastor and ask them just to simply put in the bulletin when your school district has their school board meeting, the time and the location, and a call to action for people to go and just sit and pray. Because sometimes, you don't have to have children. That's 60% of your property taxes. But the church should be able to go and get that congregation to support the children and at least to breed awareness as to what's going on in our school system. So, we're supposed to be within the 7 mountains it talks about, and that's, the media and politics and commerce. There's all these places we're supposed to be. And if we're just in the pew and we're not out, being aware of what's going on, that the nursing homes don't have people enough to hydrate our elderly, then we're falling short of doing what we should be doing to protect the vulnerable. So little call to action. So, call one pastor if you're not part of a church and say, hey, would you just put the school board meeting in your bulletin and tell people it would be a really good time. You're looking at what's going on in the world. This is a good time to pray for our children. Go show up and just sit and silently pray for the school board members and the people making the decisions. And I think people just sitting in the audience listening will start to engage or have more awareness. So our key foundation is awareness, assembly, action. And it's not because I'm setting out to be the biggest group or popularity contest, but there is safety and there is strength in numbers. So if 5 people show up somewhere where historically it's been crickets, it matters. You have a lot more power and impact than you ever could imagine. I never thought when I stood out there in that 98-degree weather with that dollar poster board that I would be where I am right now. And you know what, though? I can't do it. I'm tired. I'm weary, burnt out. And if we don't have more leadership come up from every angle and every capacity, we're not going to survive this, I don't think. It's time to get going.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming in. And, we'll see you tomorrow on Tim and Steve Show.
The lack of contracts in these areas and the lack of family planning services will have negative health consequences for those who need these services. It will result in increased unintended pregnancies, increased teen pregnancies, and negative birth outcomes. Is that correct?
That's likely.
And I understand that some counselors here have indicated that they needed additional information about these contracts. Have you answered all of the counselors' questions at this point?
We believe we have answered all questions that have been asked to the department.
Okay, and still these contracts are not being brought back?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on this item or any items as part of 21 through 27F? Oh, Councilor Gatsas.
Thank you, Governor. Procedural question. How many times can contracts come before this council after we say no?
As many times as the governor wants to put them on the agenda.
I would request the governor put the family planning contracts on the agenda at every meeting until they are approved.
We'll be here.
I mean, they can't. The governor said,
Can we fix that in the month?
nope. Sorry. Constitution. Yes, Councilor Stevens.
In regards to 27E, the Maximus contract, there's a fee, a one-time go-live charge. We've had an extensive, long-term contract with this provider. Why are we getting hit with, a 6-figure go-live fee?
Thank you, Counselor. This particular go-live fee is in reference to this particular activity in which we are working to figure out, work with our data to ensure that folks have had their second dose of vaccine. As the Counselor Wheeler asked earlier, there is a little bit of a spread between first doses and second doses. We know that in the early rollout, there may have been some data that was not captured, and so Maximus is working closely with the department to ensure that those folks get their second doses. And with this, there was some very specific training that was required to ensure that the call center was working with our vaccination program to ensure confidentiality and to understand the technical aspects of this particular task.
Did we try to attempt to negotiate on this price?
We did negotiate.
On that fee?
I'm unaware specifically on this fee, but we did negotiate the overall contract price.
Councilor Gadsden?
Thank you, Governor. I think this council was pretty clear about paying upfront fees. Probably 3 meetings ago, or the last time we met, or the time before that, but it was clear that we didn't approve of contracts that paid upfront fees. Love to hear your answer.
The funding for this, they will invoice us when they set up.
So it's a cost reimbursement for the setup. It's not an upfront payment.
Well, there aren't many companies that I know of out there that are public companies that people will give them a contract if they're paying up front for a setup. This is a setup fee, and we're paying them whether it's coming back later. That's just the same thing this council said no to.
I don't believe it is. What the council said no to was an upfront advance payment to set up. What we had talked about was that most of these companies should be able to invest in the upfront costs without us giving an advance payment. So what we did is we changed our tactic with our negotiations so that they are required to do the upfront investment and then invoice the state afterwards their costs to set up programs. This is, I would say, pretty typical to have your costs reimbursed when you're setting up a new program. So we can either do it on a one-time payment on an invoice, or they can roll it into their monthly invoice. Either way, they're going to have their costs reimbursed, especially when they're setting up new programs in the state of New Hampshire. They have to hire people, do all of those things, maybe rent a building, that type of thing.
I can tell you that I would never approve this contract. You can call it whatever you want to call it. It's still paying for their setup, which is wrong. And this council shouldn't be doing that. We can do it whatever way you want to do it.
So the council is against reimbursing companies for their costs to start a contract?
Correct. If they're providing a service and the service is $3, then they should increase their service price to make the accommodations for those setup prices. Because that's what most companies that are private companies do.
So you would rather see their setup cost integrated into their monthly invoicing instead of a one-time invoice cost after they set up?
I'm not looking to pay for their setup cost at all. You can twist the language whatever way
I'm
you
not
want to
twisting
twist
the
it.
language, Counselor.
But what I'm looking for is for them to do business as most companies in this country do. If you want our business, come in and do the service.
If I may, when we set up a $50 million MMIS system with a lot of upfront hardware, it takes years. We pay for that hardware as they go before they bill us for the management of the system. To be fair, you don't pay for them upfront, but as they put in the servers and all this kind of stuff, it's multi-million-dollar. We do pay. So I'm just saying there is a precedent here for especially with the tax system. They put it in, they send us an invoice, we move on. They put it in, and then we get to the monthly billing for the programmatic fees. I understand that you can do it, you can try to integrate that, but
I agree. I think that the impression that we were under during the initial conversation was that the council had a problem with paying money up front before they started the contract. So the way we strategized was that we would have the company pay for those startup fees themselves and invoice them to us either
Okay, we're going to take a pause here.
What are the charges? Why are they being arrested? I know. That's not their arrest.
They just don't babysitting. They didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. JR, they did nothing. They were sitting there. They did nothing. They just came and took them. They did nothing. They took Terese. They took Lady. I didn't go in and say, what are you doing? I didn't go in.
Hey.
What am I doing is forcing this. I didn't go in and say.
So that was my directive to the commissioner. If we want to see it in an even different way, I suppose we can go back and ask, but we do have a lot of contracts we do this way. But that's on me. I thought we were getting rid of prepaid and just making sure it's on the hardware.
Invoice says we paid $1 for this. So that is the way we structured it. Now, if they want to, if the council would like us to take all of the startup costs and put them in individual invoices or subsequent invoices, we can do that. But I don't think a lot of companies are going to purchase hardware, buildings, and all the programmatic needs of big $50 million programs and not expect to get reimbursed for it.
Councilor Warren?
This structure is actually very typical for these kinds of contracts. I think Commissioner Goulet would probably tell us that with respect to all sorts of IT contracts. And I think the risk of advancing money up front is that we could advance money and then never get the product. But in this case, what the way the department has structured this, we are not advancing money. They are actually incurring costs and then being reimbursed for costs. So it's sort of a service plus cost contract, which is totally typical, to my understanding, in the industry. Is that correct, Commissioner?
Yes.
Councilor Gadsden.
Thank you, Governor. I think Commissioner Goulet would say that they're not providing the service.
Artlist.io